Hey everybody, it's Max back here with D.C. Watches. Today I'm going to do the only video anybody's ever requested of me. Today we're going to do a review of my Omega Speedmaster Professional ST145022, also known as the 145.022, or the reference 3590.50, just kind of depending on how you're doing it. This is a 1993 model, so I suppose without further ado, let's get into the review. So, I bought this watch from Crown & Caliber, which is also where I bought my Nomos, as you saw in the last video. And this is the display box that it came with. I don't know if it's the original display box. It is period appropriate, but there's really no way to know if it's the original box, and these things are, I mean, pretty much a dime a dozen, so who really knows? But I do like the box, and I like having it. So, here we go. Just kind of show you guys what the display box is. It did come with a warranty card, but the reference isn't really filled out. As you can see, 1993, which fits with the general timeline based on my understanding of this reference, and all of the kind of appropriate other information. So this is the inner box, a little bit nicer than this white, kind of pebbled or dimpled, I suppose, outer box, again with the Omega logo on it, just like the top of the outer box. And as we open it up, we can see kind of a display pillow, Omega on the back of the display box. Not the nicest pillow in the world, but hey, you know, it's a pillow, and it's a watch, and watches don't really need pillows, I suppose. So now that we have it, you know, unboxed, let's get into the dimensions. So the width of the case is going to be 42 millimeters. The height from the caseback to the top of the very, very beautifully domed Hesalite, I mean, look at that distortion, is going to be 14.3 millimeters. The lug to lug, which is arguably the most important measurement of this watch, is 48.5 millimeters. The bracelet, we have starting with solid end links at 20 millimeters. This is the reference 1479 bracelet, which is my personal favorite Omega bracelet. But it's 20 millimeters at the end link, which tapers down to 16 millimeters at the clasp and back up to 18 for the clasp, which is stamped with the Omega logo and signed Speedmaster. Another really great thing about this particular clasp is that it has 6 positions of micro adjustment. The new bracelets for the new references do not have, I think they only have 2 places for micro adjustments, and I don't believe they come with half links, which kind of makes it a bit tougher of a wear, especially than this watch. Now, inside of this watch, we have the Omega 861 caliber, which was introduced in 1968 to replace the 321 movement. It's a hand-winding chronograph movement based on a Lemania movement, the Lemania 1873. This movement is non-hacking, which for some people is probably going to be a deal breaker. But for me, I like it. It's not really that big of a deal. There's also a 48-hour power reserve, and the movement beats at 21,600 beats per hour. In 1993, which is the year that this was introduced, the 861 transitioned from a 17 joule movement to an 18 joule movement. So you could technically consider this watch to be a bit of a transitional reference, but that's kind of getting a bit nitpicky. So the chronograph movement, or the chronograph aspect of the movement, I suppose, is a cam and clutch movement, which replaced the column wheel that was in 321. The reason they switched to the 861 cam and clutch is because the cam and clutch is cheaper to produce than a column wheel movement. It is also technically more durable to shock and other kind of impediments that may otherwise damage a watch movement. However, running the watch is actually causing more wear on the movement than if you had a column wheel. A column wheel, I suppose, runs more efficiently. So the 861 movement inside this watch was replaced by Omega by the 1861 in 1996, so just a few years later, or a few years after this watch was introduced. And the only real difference between the 1861 and the 861 is that the 1861 has rhodium-plated components, so a lot of the components are just differently colored than in the 861. But other than that, they're essentially the same. So the dial on this particular watch is one of my favorite things about it. As you can see, it is tritium signed because the lume on the dial is tritium. And that is all the original lume. The font on the dial is, as you can see, the long S, long R font, which is indicative of a late 80s, early 90s Omega Speedmaster reference. This is actually a bit of an interesting reference. It is technically a 145.022, but because they switched them, I believe, the movement, or they used some different components inside of the watch, it is also technically a 145.0022 because it's still using the 145.022 case. But I think what it actually is an ST145022 because this came after, or maybe the same year that Omega switched to the PIC reference system. And its general reference, I believe, is the 3590.50. But that's all kind of nitpicky. It is a 145.022. Now, the hands on the watch, unfortunately, are service hands. They're replacement hands. So instead of having tritium, the hands have superluminova, which is not fantastic. Also, you can kind of just barely make it out there, the little Omega signature right in the middle of the crystal. Was one of my favorite parts about the watch. Also on the dial, you kind of have these dish-shaped, recessed subdials. Here we have the running seconds at 9. At 6, we have an hour counter, goes up to 12. And at 3 o'clock, we have a 30-minute counter. So I'm going to pop the bracelet, and we can take a look at the Caseback really quick. So my thumb right now is just covering the serial number, but we have the traditional Caseback medallion that all Speedmaster professionals came with after, I believe, the 145.022-71. And it's the Caseback medallion that says, "Flight qualified by NASA for all manned space missions, the first watch worn on the moon," and then has the hippocampus on the back, covering up the 861 Omega manual wind movement. Okay, so now I wanted to address why I think this watch is the perfect everyday watch. The first thing is price. Now, while these can get pricey, generally speaking, I had to save up for 3 years to buy this watch. However, another watch that people point to as like the quintessential everyday watch is the Rolex Explorer. You can't really touch a Rolex Explorer for under $5,000 used. But the used prices on these are quite good. Specifically this era, the kind of mid-90s models. You can get them for around $3,500, which is not that bad in the grand scheme of luxury watches. I do understand that is expensive, but compared to other watches at this level of watchmaking, of finishing, of history, it is truly comparable. I also love this watch because it is extremely legible. The matte dial makes it legible in nearly all lights, except for darkness because there are no, the lume is gone. But in pretty much all lights, there's no glare coming off the dial, so it is extremely legible. It is also just a very handsome piece and a strap monster. So I'm going to put in some pictures now of this watch on different straps, but this thing is a strap monster. 20mm lugs means that you can get pretty much any strap on it. This watch is also extremely wearable, and that's coming from somebody who has 6.1-inch wrists. With very, very small wrists. But one of the things that makes this such a wearable piece is that the mid case on this watch is very, very slim, especially compared to a lot of, you look at modern sports watches like Tudor, which have a very, very thick mid case, almost like a block of metal sitting on your wrist. But the slimness of the mid case makes this watch very, very wearable. And even at 14.3 millimeters tall, it does not wear that tall at all. Another thing that makes this watch exceedingly wearable is the bracelet. While this thing is a strap monster, I'm a bracelet guy. I love wearing my watches on the bracelet. And the 1479 bracelet is, in my opinion, the best bracelet Omega has ever made. So the female end links makes it wear smaller than the 48.5 millimeter lug to lug we talked about before. That bracelet, as you can see, starts tapering right away. So on really any wrist, this watch is immediately going to drape over your wrist. That to me is just absolutely incredible. Another thing, the 6 levels of micro adjust, I have it on the last setting, the very last setting, and this watch, it's just, I wouldn't be able to pull off the modern bracelets. The modern bracelets don't fit my wrists. They're too large for my wrists. And while they are probably better quality, I don't actually find them as comfortable. I love this 5-link style, kind of presidential bracelet style. I think it just wears so incredibly comfortably. And the fact that it tapers down to 16 millimeters at the clasp, I mean, it is just a ridiculously comfortable bracelet. I really love this bracelet. Despite being neither chronometer certified nor hacking, the 861 movement is an incredibly robust movement. It's very accurate. It's literally up to any task. You cannot wear it harder than an astronaut will wear it. And you know, the chronograph complication is legitimately useful. Is it a $3,500 egg timer? Maybe. Do I care? Not really. I still use it at work. I use it at work a lot. I use it to time drives, errands. I think Ben Clymer said, you'd be surprised at the amount of things you start timing when you buy a chronograph. Something to that effect. I also really, really love manual wind watches. Don't get me wrong, I think automatics are probably people's preference for daily wears, but I like that when I wear this watch a lot, I have to interact with it. I'm forced to interact with the movement. And the winding on it is actually very, very, very crisp. Kind of as you would expect, I suppose, from a luxury timepiece. But for an everyday watch, I mean, you know, the wearability, the comfortability, the durability, the legibility, it really is a full package. And the story, you know, the Rolex Explorer as an everyday watch has a pretty incredible story to tell. It was the watch worn by Tenzing Norgay and Sir Edmund Hillary when they summited Everest for the first time. This watch, obviously a moon watch. And kind of harkening back to earlier when I was discussing that you really can't wear this watch harder than an astronaut would wear it. This story of how NASA certified the Omega Speedmaster is really, really special. For those of you that don't know, I am going to run through it really quick, but there's going to be a link in the description that's much more descriptive than I could ever hope to be. But when NASA was looking to qualify a watch for manned space missions, they were looking at, they wanted a wristwatch. So 3 companies submitted a wristwatch. That's Rolex, Longines, and Omega. And then Hamilton, I believe, entered a pocket watch into the competition, and they were pretty summarily dismissed after that. But NASA ran the watches through 11 separate tests, 12 if you include the qualification as a wristwatch. But the first test was a high temperature test, the second test a low temperature test, then a temperature and pressure test, then a relative humidity test, then a pure oxygen atmosphere test, a shock test, a test to see how the watch would handle acceleration, another to see how it would handle decompression. Another was a high pressure test. And then they tested the watch against vibration. And then finally, the 11th test was the acoustic noise test. Now, the Rolex chronograph that was submitted stopped twice during the humidity test. And then during the heat test, the running seconds hand was bound to the other hands during that test, and after that, Rolex was not allowed to advance. With the Longines, the Wittenauer Longines, the crystal disintegrated and warped during both the high temperature test and during the decompression tests. Now, the Omega Speedmaster. The Omega Speedmaster didn't fare perfectly, but it did fare better than everybody else, which is really all that NASA was looking for. During the decompression test, the Speedmaster gained 21 minutes, which is not great, but at least it continued to run. And then also, during the acceleration test, it lost 15 minutes, and the loom was destroyed during the course of testing. But it fared head and shoulders better than the Rolex, the Longines, and at least abided by the rules. We're looking at you, Hamilton. So between the case size, the case shape, the wonderful bracelet, the fact that any Speedmaster is going to be a strap monster, so even if you get a bracelet that you don't love, you can put it on literally anything, and it's going to look amazing. The chronograph function, the fact that it is undeniably legible, I just think that at this price point, there probably isn't a better everyday watch. And while some of you might disagree, some of you might need water resistance, I don't go in the water every day. I'm really never near water. I do live kind of close to the water, I suppose, but really the closest I ever come to a body of water is when I walk past the reflecting pool. And I'm not looking to go for a swim. But when I swim, I do take my watches off. So, you know, I just really, really think that this is one of, if not the best everyday watch at this price point. And maybe even at higher price points. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please let me know what you think of the Omega Speedmaster. I would love any recommendations down in the comments below. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will be coming back at you guys next week with another video. Thanks so much. This has been Max with DC Watches. I'll see you next week.